21st of May 2024. This edition of Boerbeskuit, I'm going to talk in general about some of the things that I'm seeing, and that is worrying me. The first thing I want to talk about is this letter that is floating around, apparently from the American embassy to Helen Zille or what. Now, my informants tell me that the letter is fake, but be it as it may. I've said it many times in my Skidmarks that South Africa has only got one major asset for BRICS, important and vital, but it's also very important for the West, and that is the Cape Searoute. And then there is the reality that the West depends heavily on raw materials from South Africa. But geopolitically, the sea route is the thing. And what was discussed in that letter is stuff that I have spoken about. What we have to accept is that the CIA and MI6 is actively busy in South Africa. BRICS, from informants that I get, the BRICS main players, Russia and China, has had it with the ANC. But the West as well, because Cyril has been riding the fence. So none of them are trusting the ANC anymore. And then you've got in the back end, you've got this really potent growth in MK. Now, that is something that we have to take into consideration. And I have spoken about that. But when it gets to the Cape Searoute, it has always been my opinion that the West is going to grab the Cape. There's guys from Cape Exit and let the Cape go and what the fuck else. And that referendum party and all of that. That's bullshit. Those guys will, I've said it, they will never succeed because the West will not allow that Cape to become independent, because then they've got a problem with the sea route. Now, if the DA bloc manages to retain control over the Cape, the West is fairly safe. But BRICS is not safe at all. And you have a situation which is a reality. There's a massive American military base in Botswana. Yes, the base is fairly dormant. But with technology being what it is, the Americans can man that base with thousands of soldiers and potent equipment within 24 hours. The British has got two bases in Lesotho. They've got more choppers in Lesotho than what the South African Defence Force has. And they're 17 minutes from Bloemfontein. The air base in Botswana is about 11 minutes from Cape Town. So keep that in mind when you talk about these things. And the West has shown it many times. There's many examples. They don't really play if they want to take a country. They don't. They don't colonize the country, but they put a puppet regime in play. Now the ANC is a puppet regime, but now the ANC puppet has got a problem. The strings are tangled. Nobody knows who's pulling the strings anymore. So in the ANC it's just chaos. They don't know where they belong because they've been riding the fence and now both sides wants to fuck them up. And they're not going to make it. It is my personal opinion that the main role of MK is to get the ANC out of Natal, make sure they've got an overwhelming majority between MK, the IFP, and a few of the smaller parties, and declare Natal independent. That is what I think is going to happen. Why? Why do I say that? For the simple reason that we know that Zuma is 100% committed to BRICS. And with an independent Natal under control of Zuma, be it behind the scenes or actually physical head of that country, the Russians will be welcome. And that will allow the Russians to establish themselves militarily on our east coast. And a military presence of the Russians, a serious presence, will make the West think twice before they grab the Cape. Because if they do grab the Cape, don't be surprised if the Eastern Cape doesn't turn into a hot war zone. That is something that can very easily happen. But the Eastern Cape has been basically depopulated. All the Eastern Cape citizens are in the Western Cape. Go and just look at all those squatter camps around the city, and you know where the Eastern Cape is. And then the Cape is also packed, thickly packed, with illegal immigrants. So I am glad I don't live in the Cape. That's all I'm going to say. And then I have to talk about this. There's a guy, I call him Grease the Toy. Initially, he started a YouTube channel, and the main drive of his channel was to attack each and every video that I make, and then he also made some wild statements, unsubstantiated, and now I see he's changed his focus to Wynand. And the reason why I mention Grease the Toy is he is the guy that will very quickly tell you the apartheid regime has fallen, the ANC has taken over, and it's a total balls up. So he will acknowledge the fact that after 94, South Africa changed politically and socio-economically. But that same guy will ignore the fact that the USSR collapsed and that Putin inherited a country that was destroyed by communism, and that Putin changed that country over a period of 20 years. That Russia is today one of the fastest growing economies in the Western Bloc. Russia has got a stable workforce. They have got a stable economy, they've got a stable industry, their money supply is stable, their inflation is stable, everything is stable. But Grease the Toy will tell you Putin is a communist dictator. Now, when it comes to dumb people, and you must understand, being dumb doesn't mean you cannot be successful. There are a lot of successful people which are actually dumb. And Grease the Toy denies that the USSR has collapsed. And then he also makes this statement that Putin wants to rebuild the USSR. I listened to an interview, I think it was 2014 or 2011. No, it was 27. Where Putin explicitly said to a question from a journalist, yes, it was a sad thing when the USSR broke up, but the sadness was in the fact that all of a sudden millions of Russians found themselves homeless. They were not belonging to Mother Russia anymore, and that was a tragedy. And Putin said, I see myself as the Russian president, I see myself responsible for every Russian in this world. And then they asked him a question about the USSR. And he said, yes, it was bad and a sad moment when it broke up. But anybody that tries to rebuild the USSR is out of touch with reality and actually stupid. And you can see what the West did after the USSR broke up. The West stirred up shit in Kazakhstan. They stirred up shit in Chechnya. They stirred up shit in Georgia. They're still busy in Georgia as we talk. They are still busy in Azerbaijan. The West is forever going around the globe, stirring shit, and they use the Soros-funded NGOs And Redacted did something last night, and you can see how dangerous these NGOs really are. And the sad part is, everybody thinks Soros is funding those NGOs. Meanwhile, it is the taxpayers of the United States and the taxpayers of Europe that are funding those NGOs. And that's how Soros makes his money. That's the way it goes. Now, here in South Africa, we've got the same story. Soros is active here. His NGOs are active here. But we're sitting with a dumb population that do not understand the dangers of these things. And you listen to a guy like Chris the Toy, and he will tell you how great Zelensky is. But he will not tell you that Zelensky outlawed the Russian Orthodox Church, jailed a lot of the monarchs and priests and what of the church, plus they physically destroyed a lot of churches. Other churches, they have allowed people to have Satanist rituals in those churches. But Chris the Toy will tell you Zelensky is the hero. Chris the Toy is the guy that said the bombing of Donetsk city and the bombing of school buses and schools, that is fair, it's war. He will not tell you that the Ukrainians killed 15,000 Russians in the Donbass since 2014. He will not tell you that many of those cities that the Russians has driven the Ukrainians out of, they find in basements, they find children that are 5 and 6 and 7 years old that has never been allowed by their parents to go out of the basements. They lived in those basements for 7 years, basically. That will the Chris the Toy will not tell you that. But then he has the audacity to attack Wynand, and he attacked Wynand about that interview that Wynand had with a guy that lives in Sumy. And Chris the Toy makes a lot of statements about a guy that is physically living in Ukraine. Now, what I try to wrap my head around is how can Chris the Toy assume that he knows more about Ukraine than a guy that's actually living there? But that is how these people operate. The Grises of our society, that's how they operate. Lots of nuances, lots of rhetoric, lots of assumptions, but they spread it as if it's the gospel. So, on this morning, what we need to take into consideration and take really serious note of. 1, the West is not going to allow control of the Cape Searoute to slip out of their hands. They're not going to allow it. Doesn't matter which party thinks they can do something, but the West is not going to allow it. So, what can we expect? I am confident that we're going to see major interference in the election, but we are also going to see major of disturbing incidents to try and push the voters into a certain direction. That is what I expect is going to happen. And all of it is done by the West to maintain the grip on the Cape Searoute. And if the West decides they're going to do a thing like this fake letter that is being pushed around stating they want the Cape independent, you must understand that's not going to be a real independence for the citizens of the Cape. And I don't know how bigger area they're going to grab. I have a funny feeling they're only going to take the greater Cape Town area to include Simonstown. That's it. That is what they want. Because if they have that, they've got a strategic base to influence traffic around the southern tip. Because for ships to move so far away from the coast, so that they are not being threatened by whoever is seated in the Cape, is going to push them into waters that is, the Cape is known as the Cape of Storms. So that is a serious thing that can happen. And for BRICS, that would be disastrous, because there's problems with the Suez Canal, and we've already seen how many shipping traffic has been diverted around the Cape. And the tragedy is that South Africa is actually not making much money from these ships that are moving around our coast, because our harbors cannot provide services to them. So we're losing to all sides. But it's this ANC government. They are now banking on the fact that most of these youngsters that are now getting into voting age never lived under apartheid, so they don't understand what was really happening in the country during apartheid. They only see the chaos, and the chaos created by the ANC. It is the ANC that fucked the economy up. It's the ANC that fucked the railways up. It's the ANC that fucked the harbors up. It's the ANC that fucked the Eskom up. It's the ANC that fucked the steel industry up. It's the ANC that fucked the textile industry up. It's the ANC that fucked the railway system up. The railway system was a massive employer. But this ANC don't care when people lose their jobs. They bullshit the people with this universal income grant. Where how are they going to finance that? I saw an article again this morning where the guy reckons that to finance the NHI, they will have to up the taxes, 15% on the taxpayers. But that's not all. Now you must add in the proposed universal income grant. For that they are going to need 20% tax. So between the NHI and the universal income, you're already talking about a minimum of 35% increase in tax. How can 7 million taxpayers afford that? How can that taxpayer survive? But this is the problem. The voters are too dumb to ask that question. How is all of this freebie shit that you are promising going to be financed? And the voters forget about the thousands of houses promised by Cyril for Alexander. The voters forget about that modern high-tech city that Cyril promised. The voters forget the high-speed rail links that Cyril has promised. So we have got a major problem. But what you cannot deny is that poverty is rolling over South Africa like a tsunami. And it's just going to get worse, because if you look at what Malema is doing and how he's pushing the people and directions he's pushing the people, all of them are pushing the people into communism. And you can go and check. 45 million people was killed by communism in Russia. And more than that, I think 200 million was killed in China by communism. And there you sit with them. China and Russia as the main players in BRICS. They're building a new world. And they are focused on trade and industry. And here we come with these dumb fuckers here in South Africa that wants to implement communism and socialism. And those two, Russia and China, look at it and shake their heads and wonder, can these people not learn? Have they learned nothing? But Moses 6 verse 6, stupid people must suffer. Please give me a like and a subscribe and share the thing. Thank you for your support.